little bit more for you this morning, Mr. Palmer. How are you, sir?
Doing good, John. How about yourself?
Oh, it is a, I'm not going to say the day, but it's definitely one of those days.
It's a day.
And it is. I'm good. It's a crazy couple weeks coming up for me. I got vacation right around the corner. I've got some big customer meetings, so we're taking a break for a short little chit chat since nobody wanted to talk to us today except for you and I, and we always talk. So,
Yep.
what's our let's just jump right into it, right? So what's our marching orders? What's our conversation starter for the day?
So I'm working on a project for actual work, not one of my little side projects. Like I'm trying to, like I'm still trying to figure out how to make a smart home because I swear, all I want to do is I want to have a manual button that you can push and then something else happens. I don't want to do voice. I just want a manual button, and trying to find something that will do a manual button push that will then cause something else to happen is such a pain. So not one of those projects. I know I get sidetracked, especially on in a morning where I haven't had enough coffee.
You're
But
like I was gonna say you're like a fisherman in a boat show with the glitter boats. Woo!
right,
Uh,
squirrel,
yeah, exactly.
easily triggered. No, so I'm working on a project at work, and part of the project is I needed to send some APs to some people. And I know that some of the people actually that I sent them to actually listen to the podcast. So hi everybody. Um, and so I was asked, they're like, my bosses came to me and they said, hey, what do you want to send these people? When it was like, we're going to send them an AP. What do you want to send them? And I said, I want to send them a Ruckus R650. And it was funny because everybody that heard about my plan, they came back to me and they said, why do you want to send them a Ruckus R650? And I said, well, because it's my favorite AP. So what I want to talk to you about today is I know what my favorite AP is. I kind of understand my like controller platform preferentials. Like it's not that this stuff doesn't work. It's not like there's like, the other things aren't good. And I know all the Ruckus PLMs that listen to this, we should probably like put a trigger warning or a disclaimer. Go, we're not picking on you guys.
Like content warning trigger.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm with you.
I'll have to send an email and be like, you should probably not listen to this. So that's what I want to talk about, right? Is because we're always asked, it's like, well, what do you recommend? And of course, the answer is it depends. Sam,
Mm-hmm.
if you ever email me back, I'll send you your dollar. So that's what I want to talk about is, hey, let's put it down on record. What is our preferred AP controller platform or whatever else that we use when we design and build networks? What is it that we like the best? Or what is our preference, personal preference? This isn't tied to, anything official. Like I said, all the PLMs are going to lose their minds. And so I have to send them a,
Yeah, I mean it's definitely it's a good conversation to have, which is why we're having it and why we recorded this and why everybody's listening to this because it's a great. I mean, it's like the best podcast topic ever, right? So, but it's a very loaded question.
I don't know about the best podcast topic ever.
Come on, man. But so I mean, in all seriousness, though, like it's a good question to ask, especially let's put a couple different hats on, and you have the hats in the background. I don't, or maybe I do, and it's a really dark background, and nobody can see this because this is not on video. Well, I mean, it's on video for us, but it's an audio podcast. But anyways, sidebar gone. It's important. So like, you've got the people that listen to this that some of them work for Ruckus, some of them use Ruckus, some of them might be listening to this saying, "I've never used Ruckus before. How do I get started? What's the best, like, how do I dip my toe in it?" And there are those of us in the Wi-Fi community that have a habit of when they're learning, especially, or you're trying to learn something new, they go out on eBay or they go out to classified ads on one of the different, wireless community sites and people trade gear all the time. So just to learn. So it's a valid question from a couple different angles, right? And I being an SE, you being, I guess TME adjacent, something like
Don't
that.
know. we're still 3.5 years in. We're still working on that one.
Don't hold your breath. But so the reality though is like there's a couple different ways, and so saying it depends. Everybody always gets. We say it tongue in cheek because it is a joke, and it's we have to pay our what's it, like the respect up to Sam for that. But it's true, and it sounds cheeky, and I was in a class at some point in the not too distant past where somebody actually said that, and they were not joking about it, and somebody got offended, and they're like, "I'm not joking. It really does depend because you need to know your circumstances." So, for me, I would say my favorite AP is the one that doesn't break, which is a loaded question considering what we just talked about before we actually started officially recording. But I mean, that's I'm easy. If you're talking about what I'm using at home, I've got a mix. I have a mix in part because it's what I have, and in part because I wanted to learn the product. I have an R650, an R750, an R850, and I think an R550 running right now. No, I don't have this massive house. And again, you're showing things off on video for an audio podcast. Jim's looking at his back shelf with his hung APs.
No. What I'm looking at is what I'm looking at is I'm trying to see which one of our current lineup of APs I don't have. So no, but it is. It's one of those, and this is why I think it's a good conversation for us to have, is because, to your point, like in my office right now, which is not that big, I have 3 APs that are online. Do I need 3 APs that are online? No, I don't need any of them actually, but it allows me to do testing and work, and I can try different things. So as an SE who has to know the entire lineup, I feel like, and then whatever it is I do.
Well, and that's the thing is, it depends on the SEs, not to cut you off, but like, so I have a couple clients, couple customers who dabble in all the different APs, but I have a couple sort of main focal points at any given time. And when I'm focused on those particular tasks at hand, I could be very, very focused on one particular type of AP. So I don't necessarily have, I try to know them all because at the end of the day, I have customers who at any given time could pull in an H550 or an R350 or a T811 or a T750 or whatever the case may be. So I have to at least kind of be up on it, but there's definitely, there's ones you favor at the end of the day from a selling point, or and it's not a salesy pitch, but what the customers want based on the sweet spots, if you will. But in terms of at home, I like them all because they've all been really good. I've plugged them in and I haven't had anything go wrong, knock on wood. But yeah.
And that's an interesting, it's an interesting point, right? Because like I said, so in my office that you cannot see, or at least people, you can, nobody else can. Well, you can't see my H550 that's running because that's off camera, but I have an R610 and I have an R710. And then, then I have, like I said, I was thinking about what APs I actually don't have. So I don't have an H350, so I haven't tested that, or the T811, or the what?
I offered you an H350, didn't I?
I don't know.
If you want one that bad, I can probably get you one.
I don't want one that bad. I'm just saying. So this is a full disclosure moment there, John. Yeah. So I don't have an H350 and I don't have a T811.
You don't want a T811. And that's not a knock on the T811. It's the reality is the T811, for those of you who don't know, and chances are there's not many people listening to the podcast who would know, that is a cable modem driven outdoor AP. And it is a tremendous piece of kit. And I don't mean it just it's a really good AP. I mean it also, it's a very big AP.
Yes.
One T811, when I had one, and I shipped mine off to a customer for demo and never got it back. When I had one, it took up like the box that it was in and all the crate and everything, all the packing material and everything. One T811 was as much space as most of the rest of the APs that I had on hand at the time. It was like, it's a big box.
It's a large AP. So, yes. But that's the funny thing, right? Is of all these other APs that I've tested, and I have an R500, I have an R600, I got an M510, I got some old 802.11n ones, to your point, that I picked up many years ago from Keith Parsons at WLPC. I got some 7982s that I was playing around with for a little bit. And I haven't had a bad experience with any of them. So it's not like I plugged in the AP and just went, wow, this thing just does not work. So it ends up being, it's not so much of, oh, don't buy that AP because that AP doesn't work. It turns into what AP hits that sweet spot for what I'm looking for, not as like an end user, but as like an administrator
that's it, right? At the end of the day, with so much, and it goes beyond Wi-Fi, but this is a primarily network-based, Wi-Fi-based podcast, right? What are you trying to do? What's the audience? What's your skill set? You have family and friends that you don't want to do tech support for. You might be steering them towards a Best Buy type option, right? It works. They can understand it. They plug it in. Maybe, maybe you really don't hate yourself today, and you're going to be like, okay, here's a Ruckus or something else, and there's some more bells and whistles, and call me if you need any help. But there's so many. I mean, that's the beauty part, right? Like, just looking at our product catalog, you've got, I don't even know how many APs and whatnot that we offer right now. Any one of them will work. It's just a matter of what are you trying to do with it. Like, I'm not going to put an H550 outside.
Right.
I wouldn't, because I live in the Northeast, but there are definitely people that could put an H550 in the right area of the right part of the world because it's dry and it's covered and whatever. I don't recommend it. Again, the H550 is an indoor wall mounted IP, but it could be done in theory. I guess not recommended. Certainly would violate, I would imagine, the warranty is covered and all that, but it depends, right? I mean, if it's a temporary solution and you're just looking for something to get a little bit of Wi-Fi at like a covered bar area, maybe, sure. I'd rather put a T350 out there, but that's me.
So just for the record, because I was working on a different project, of the mainline APs, discounting the T811CM for the reason you were talking about with the cable modem part, we have 11 APs in our current lineup. As far as the indoor outdoor Wi-Fi 6, Wi-Fi 6E, we have 11 APs. So now I'm going to hold your feet to the fire, John, because we've talked about a lot of different things in our 13 minutes that we've been going so far. I want you to state right now, for the record.
Oh boy.
Of these current 11, and I'll even, because you have a little bit of experience with the T811CM, I'll even add that in. Of the 12 APs that I have on my list, tell me, John, which one is your favorite?
I have so many different answers I could go with, and some of them are definitely going to have to get edited out, and I have the editing power, and I really don't want to do a lot of editing this week. So, I can't say it depends. I really can't. The T811 is a really solid piece of kit, in my opinion. There are going to be those that feel otherwise. It's a complex animal because you mentioned that the CM attached to it is cable modem. So unlike most APs that we have, you actually have to deal with two separate sets of software. You've got your AP firmware and your cable modem firmware, and for what it's for, it's perfect. It's got a special place in my heart, but I'm going to say, I mean, just from what I'm using at home right now, I'd probably say the 650 or the 752. And honestly, here's my rabbit hole, right? And
you don't get
this conversation before.
You don't get two. You got to pick one.
I'll see. I can't. I really can't. And it sounds like such a homer thing. And I know there's going to be people that, it's a Ruckus podcast. Of course, he can't just pick one. He loves all the Ruckus APs. But here's the reality, right? Like, it depends on what you want to do. And again, we had some of this off. Well, we didn't have it off camera. I'm just never sharing it. It's not going to see light of day. But whatever. You could take the R350 out, or the R550, or the R650, the 750, and the 850. The 850 is a beast. It's a big AP. I have one running in my house, mostly because I wanted to play with it. I wanted to use it, and why not? I had one available. it's great. It's big. Those are the ones you're going to put in like a classroom setting or not even a classroom, but like a lecture hall. For a home, it's overkill. The 650 and the 750 are kind of close, but then you take the 550 out, and the 550 is not a bad size either. And it performs pretty well. I use my R550, full disclosure. I have it connected. It sits in a window overlooking our pool. It's connected mesh, so I didn't have to run any wires or trench anything. I was happy to avoid that. And it works fine. Everybody outside has Wi-Fi. It's good. Everything serves a purpose. The 350 I didn't get my hands on until a while back. I don't have any to put at home. It's a nice small AP. But it's one of those where, again, go in the feature set and it all because TME and all that. But, you start at the 350 and you work your way up in terms of features and spatial streams and things like that. So I'd probably settle in the middle. If you told me I had to have a 650 or 750, I'd be happy with it. 650, I think, is a nice, it hits everything, right? It's a good size. If you're trying to be not overly because some people like to get aesthetically pleasing about their APs, which always cracked me up. As long as we're not talking about one of those really old big ones that are just like they look like they could maim you. I think most APs look fine. Yeah, I would say give me the 650, which is ironic because I'd have to check. I don't know that I sell any. Maybe I do, and if I do, and I've got a customer listening that knows that, I apologize. It's just I haven't had a problem with any of our APs, man. I can't pick one. I'm like, you're asking a parent of 11 to pick their favorite child. It's not like, and I've got nothing wrong with any of the other one, nothing against any of the other APs. And I didn't throw any love for the 760 or the 560, and it's not because they're not good APs. I have one 6E client and it's mine. So nobody in my house is clamoring for it. So I really have no outside of labbing it up for client work. I have no ulterior motive to put one in the house yet. Now, it's planned at some point, not too distant future. I will either upgrade to 6E or potentially Wi-Fi 7 APs when they're available. But yeah, give me a 650 and I'll be a happy man and shut up about it.
So I must be a pretty bad parent because I will rank my 11 kids or 12 kids. Actually, for me, because I haven't played with the T811 or the H350, they get a little bit of a thing. But I agree with you. The R650 is my favorite AP. Although a close second is the R550. And the reason I will put the R550 up there is because I saw a report from somebody else. It wasn't a Ruckus report. And it was a, hey, we're going to test all these APs. I'm going to go see if I can find that link, and I'll put the link in the show notes. But they tested the R550 and it almost beat their AP. Like, the only reason it didn't beat their AP is because, and I'm looking at all the different specifications right now, the R550 has a 1 gig Ethernet connection. Now, for most people, a 1 gig Ethernet connection is perfectly fine. You don't need more than that on an R550 that has 2 radios. You just don't. I mean, now when we throw in that third radio, and this is a topic that I'm hoping we can record with some other people later in the year, I believe that you need more than 1 gig with 3 radios. But with 2 radios, the R550 really is a workhorse. I mean, so I actually, my sister was having problems. And so I got her an R550 and because she lives in a townhome and it's a residential space and it backs up against like a strip center shopping mall type of thing. And and it's just really bad. And so I was like, here, use an R550, and she loves it because for her house, it's perfect. Now, the next on my list actually is going to be a little different. And I'm going to say the R610 is my third favorite AP. And some people might look at me kind of funny. It's an 802.11 AC Wave 2 AP. But man, is that thing just a beast. It is a workhorse. I mean, I've seen it do things that I never thought an AP could do. And so my top 3, I would actually, and then honestly, and then I kind of started throwing the other ones in, and yes, they're all the same. But getting back to our it depends thing, something that you were talking about the R850, and I have one. But one of the things that I find that the R850 is really good for is actually running Unleashed and running as an Unleashed master. The main controller, because it's an R850, right? So when you look at the specs of that, it's a beefy AP, right? Because it's meant to be, like you said, in lecture halls and other like really high density environments and stuff like that. And so but then it also has better processors, and the chips on it are, to actually do like not just the Wi-Fi part, but the other parts are a little bit beefier. So if you're running an Unleashed network, you look at like an R850 or an R750, they're going to have a little bit beefier components when it comes to other parts of it. When you look at the Ethernet, the 850 is a 5 gig and the 750 is a 2.5. And so you have all these other things that are going on with that AP that allows it to do things like running Unleashed, which I then want to touch on in the last 9 minutes that we have left. I'm actually keeping track to make sure we don't go over.
Well, that's why I have you, because I wasn't.
Because my next question is around controllers. Now, Zone Director is something that I think everybody who's ever worked with Ruckus, been Ruckus adjacent or anything, has an affinity or has used the Zone Director. Unfortunately, the Zone Director is starting to go away. So now we're left with basically 3 different controller platforms. We have the Smart Zone, we have Ruckus One, and we have Unleashed. Of the 3, I will tell you that, and no offense to my boss, Middle, who we had on to talk about Ruckus One, and the other people, I prefer personally, and I'm going to put this, a virtual Smart Zone Essentials controller. That is my controller of choice. And I don't believe that the Unleashed controller is too much for people like my sister, who's running Unleashed on her R550 in her townhome in West Valley City, Utah. So that's where I'm at. I like the virtual Smart Zone Essentials.
So I'll see, this one I can rank a little bit because I've used them all to some extent or another, and the ranking to at least a little extent is going to be partly driven by my amount of time on each particular interface, right? So number one, right out of the chute for me is Virtual Smart Zone High Scale. Now, why high scale? Primarily, honestly, my customers use high scale. So when I built my lab, when I first started here, and I put it in, I have my stuff running on an Intel NUC. It runs fine. I built high scale because that's what they were using. At the end of the day, there are, and I don't put me on the spot. We don't have enough time for it. I'm not going to go Google. There are a few features that you get with high scale that you don't get with Essentials. For most uses, if we're talking about like, small, medium business, if we're talking about home labs and you're just trying to get used to the controller interface, won't matter. If you're labbing at the home lab and you're trying to get used to something for a customer, you need to make sure what they're going to want. I know one of the things high scale has that Essentials doesn't have by default is the 3 interfaces, the 3 NICs, which for
explain that.
Well, I'm not going to because I don't actually use them because I don't need it and my customer doesn't use it in their deployment.
But why?
You've got control. You see, you're putting me on the spot. There's 3 different control data, and I forget what the third one is.
Management.
There's 3 different. Thank you. There's 3 different planes. You've got 3 separate interfaces for each of them, and you have 3 different IP addresses, the full 9 yards. You can't get that with Essentials. You get that with
Correct.
There's a couple other things. Certain areas of the controllers are great at. I believe you and I at one point had to look at that for something else, and I had it and you didn't. It's probably,
yes.
Obviously clustering and things like that. It's the more robust, if you will.
Clustering will work on Essentials or high scale.
Okay. Maybe it didn't at one point. I don't know.
No. What we were working on was
redundancy, maybe
carrier offload.
Oh, there you go.
What's carrier offload? If you're doing like a full blown carrier offload, there's a couple of features within the high scale that Essentials doesn't have. But I mean, again, it's one of those things where it's a really a niche.
Yeah.
You know, I don't want to say
I don't
niche.
even want to say like, I'm not even going to say, well, it's not niche. I mean, like to me, if you're
No,
deploying enterprise,
I
you're
was
probably
wrong.
going high scale. But so, if high scale has 100% of all the features we've ever built, I don't know the exact percentage, but to me, when I looked at Essentials, when we were looking at it, Essentials feels pretty close. Like all the day-to-day stuff that most people are going to use. If you don't like think you need it, you probably don't. But if this is like a sales pitch or a POC kind of thing, talk to your SC. They'll tell you which one you need. Not going to get into that. We can have a whole separate podcast about that.
It's on the list, by the way.
There you go. So high scale for me, like I said, primarily driven by customer use. I wanted to make sure I was using on a daily basis what they were using on a daily basis, so that if they had any questions, I could go into my own controller and tell them and use it and test it and things like that. From there, I would go Unleashed. And then I would rank Ruckus 1 last. And then again, this is not what I like more than one or the other. It's how much I've used one. And I've used Unleashed a little bit more than Ruckus 1 being newer. I've made sure I've put my APs in all of the environments at one point or another, just to make sure that I'm familiar with what we have. So that if a customer asks me about it, I can talk to it. I've had, for example, I've used Unleashed in some lab environments for the customers when they didn't have a lab controller available for, they had like literally, it was like an air-gapped lab. So everything had to function within that chamber to run. And so the easiest solution for the sake of them testing RF was Unleashed. And I'm not knocking the product at all. To me, it made me feel like this was something like, almost like an off-the-shelf product. Like if you're coming to me, like if I went back like 10 years and where all I was experiencing was the consumer stuff. You go on Amazon or whatever and you buy, $150 with the big marketing spiel on the front that says, oh, you're going to get 1.21 gigawatts of RF. The interface in a good way was very familiar to that, because it was very much an advanced form of that, but it was, if you were coming from that world to Unleashed, to me, it's not going to be it's not going to be shock. It's going to be a little bit more intuitive to that world. Like people are kind of like graduating up. It was very user friendly. It was full featured. You could do as much or as little with it as you wanted to get running. And even the folks that I was working with were like, wow, this is really easy to get done. Now, Ruckus 1, I'm sure, is probably pretty good too. I've hardly scratched the surface of it, only because I run my house on a controller on a NUC, and right now my customers don't use R1.
So in the spirit of full disclosure, I also run my home network on my virtual smart zone running on a NUC. But I also, I mentioned I have an R610 and an R710, and those are running Unleashed and cloud and Ruckus 1 in the cloud. So that way I can hop between all three of them. And this is one where I'm going to, even though I held your feet to the fire, where I'm actually not, I like the Essentials one. And some people are going to look at me and go, really, it's, you want the biggest and best. And yes. And high scale gives you all that. And it gives you some other.
I have to cut you off for 1 second there, because you're talking about biggest and best, and people are like, oh, it's price tag. But here's the beauty part. I might be speaking out of turn, and if I get myself in trouble, but I'm pretty sure the licensing is basically the same. It's a configuration choice. You install that license, it asks you, are you configuring high scale or Essentials?
It's
support might be different, but it's not like,
it's not crazy different. So from that aspect, I think you're right. And of course, there's an SE listening right now that's just screaming at his phone because we're not. But
again, we're not a sales podcast. I'm not going to, and your prices may vary and all that, but it's not like, we're not talking about like,
it's not 10 times.
The hardware. Obviously we're talking about virtualized. So you're running your own VM farm, or if you're building it at home or whatever, the hardware is on you anyways, right? We're not selling you virtualized hardware for that. We'll sell you a Smart Zone 144
appliance.
We'll sell you the appliance for it. But if you're doing virtual, it's all your hardware. And that's really what drives it is, what are you throwing at it?
And anymore, if you are a customer, or if you're somebody who's like, hey, I want, if you're looking at the Smart Zone controller platform as an option for you, I'm almost going to guarantee you that you have a virtual environment in which to run one of these. And so, no offense to Trey, who's the Smart Zone PLM. Hi, Trey. Um, you know, I anymore, I'm really leading, if we're going to talk Smart Zone, I'm going to talk a virtual Smart Zone, because if you're that type of customer where that's your target, where that's what you're looking for, then more than likely you already are running a virtual environment in your own data center. And so saying, hey, these are the resources we need, instead of trying to sell you an appliance, which then, takes up rack space, it takes up power plugs, you need redundant power. There's all these other things that come into play when you say, hey, I'm going to do, and you and I have both been there. So, when you're going to do a controller or a server in a data center, if the option's there, but we generally anymore, you really need to lead with a virtual one. So all of that being said, even though I picked the virtual Smart Zone Essentials, I'm going to now say that, especially with Ruckus 1, and Unleash 200.14, which is the latest version of that one, I don't think you can go wrong. I don't think that there is a wrong solution when it comes to the controller platform. So even though I picked the virtual Smart Zone Essentials, I think it has the widest appeal. What they've done with Ruckus 1, and they being the developers, and the PLM, Dave Burns and Sarab Mather, what they've done with that platform, and taking it from where it was, and really is the evolution. Ruckus 1 is actually a really good option if that's what fits your need. And so, people ask me all the time, they're like, what about at Ruckus that makes you, so loyal? And we talked about this last week or 2 weeks ago with Bart, and it's really this idea of, we can ask anybody, what is your pain point? What is your problems? What are the things that you are trying to solve, with your network? And we can then, and this is why we have all this gear running in our houses, we can then go and craft and build a solution that solves their problem. And again, so it becomes just a question. It depends, what is it that you need? Do you need an R850 running on a, high scale, a Smart Zone high scale? We have that. Are you, I talked to a school, and it was basically like this. It was a standalone school, almost like a private school. And they had 13 APs and like 2 switches. And they were on Zone Director, and they're like, what do we do? And I was like, it's easy. It's unleashed, because they're like, we have these constraints, we have these things. And we went, and as part of their constraints, it was, cloud, and that solution, doing to a subscription-based model wasn't in the cards. And so it was like, well, with 13 APs and 2 switches, Ruckus Unleashed is your answer. It's we have those different solutions that allow us to simply, find out what is your pain point, what is your problem, and then we can direct you for it. If you have, more than, or not even more than, if you have 3 APs and you're like, they're all in different places, but I want to have similar configurations across them, and I don't want to mess with it, Ruckus 1 is 100% your answer. If you have 1,000 APs across all kinds of different locations, and you want to have that, Ruckus 1 is your solution. There's reasons why there's a lot of customers who will say, and this is something that I hope we can talk about with somebody else, is the cloud aversion. I don't want to have my controller in the cloud. I don't want to have data in the cloud, which it's really not. But there's all these things where they're just like, look, we have either policies or our own reasons why cloud is not the thing. Well, then, yeah, virtual Smart Zone running on a NUC, knock on wood, as long as you can get them, is your preferred solution. So,
yeah. And the thing and we talked about this before, and again, this could be another podcast topic on its own, but with 2 exceptions right now, and we're not going to get into that, any Ruckus AP, modern AP, I'm going to say that because my history with Ruckus starts around the time of the the 750, the 650, and so on. I have a couple. I think I have a 710 and a 310 and or an H310. But I came in more recently. And I know you did, but you beat me by a year or so. All the modern APs, you get a T750 even too, R750, R650, any of the ones we talked about. The R650, we'll pick on that since that's your favorite kid. You can run them on any one of those platforms.
Yep.
So if you buy, putting on the sales hat for a second, if you buy, say you're, a doctor's office, and this is actually a good example because I've got a real world conversation that happened not that long ago. But so if you have a doctor's office and you want to buy 5 APs and you only need something small, grab 5 R650s and you can do it on Ruckus One and you're perfectly happy. And let's say you're doing really well and suddenly you've got not one office, but 5. Well, you can still do Ruckus One because the reality is it's designed for that. You don't want to have the management overhead. But if suddenly you're finding yourself that your 5 offices grew into like 500 and you decide you want a controller, well, those original R650s, if they're still working, just move them to the controller. There's no new APs required or anything like that. So that's pretty nice. It's the flexibility of the Ruckus side of things. That's again biased and whatnot. But
I have another real world example that is not. I was contacted by one of our partners, and they said, "Hey, we need some help." And the scenario was they had somebody who was it was a managed service provider type of scenario where they were switching managed service providers, and they were going from, and there's a whole lot of other stuff that goes along with that. But anyway, what they were doing is they were moving the APs from Ruckus One to a virtual smart zone high scale that because they were switching managed service providers. And so, in your doctor office scenario, if, and I had this happen with me recently, is the doctor's office actually got bought by a larger organization. And so it's like, oh, well, if you were running on Ruckus One and your new parent organization that just bought you they already have virtual smart zone running in their data centers, then you simply just say, hey, we're going to now go from one to the other. You schedule an outage, you push them over, they do new firmware downloads, they reboot, and now you're back online. And so that is something that, again, it's one of those features where, I think sometimes we don't talk about enough about the ease of how you can go from, whether you start on Unleashed or Ruckus One, and then you grow and you go, I need to go from Unleashed to Ruckus One, and then you get bought out and they go, oh, well, we have a virtual, smart zone running in our data centers and it's already done and everything. So now we're going to then move you over to that. It's all there. And so that's one of the things I love about is the work that they've done on the 3 different controller platforms has really gotten to the point now where I used to be cloud averse. And now I'm sitting here going, do I really need to have a virtual smart zone running in my own house when I have access to Ruckus One? Because I'm starting to question it. And I never thought I'd be in a point where I was questioning moving from a dedicated wireless LAN controller to a cloud managed thing. And now I'm just kind of going,
your cloud evolution is like so many other people's cloud evolutions when you think about it, right? Like, and I know we're going to wrap it up, but so at one point way back whenever like Dropbox and like iCloud, all these things came to be available, nerds like us were like, this is cool, but like, is it ever going to be applicable? Am I ever going to see it? Right. And you had those admins going like, I'm going to keep my Outlook in I'm going to have this like 2-rack solution where all my Outlook, my Exchange servers are, and God have, whatever, if they break, we're screwed. And now you look at it, right? And you've got, and maybe it became a bigger thing with the pandemic and remote work and all that. But with cloud, you're less dependent on certain things, and you've got security and you've got everything available wherever you need it. And so why not a controller at that point? And I agree, like, there's definitely been times when I'm doing demos and we talk about this when I was teaching the RCWA, and if you teach it in Prague, there's definitely a benefit to be able to plug in an AP and not have the controller in your suitcase. It phones home to a controller that's in the cloud that you can fire up, that you can log into, and everything is there. You can teach your class with it, but you don't have to worry about checking the Nook through security and is it going to make it in one piece? Is TSA going to handle it a little too rough and suddenly something doesn't work? So there's definitely pros and cons, and I think it's come a long way to the point where like there's very particular cases that are very resistant to the cloud, and to not be dismissive about it, having heard them, knowing some of them quite well firsthand, they're valid concerns or valid reasons to push against the cloud, with some caveats. But for most deployments, for talking about the SMBs type stuff, lab, if you can get it. I mean, obviously you're dealing with compute costs and things like that, but if the environment is available to you and it's an economical solution, why not? It's just,
I feel like
we can have another debate about that. We can definitely go.
Because we are now way over time, but and I've been messaging you saying we got to stop talking. But I feel like
responded.
At the end of the day, I feel like the controller platforms have now matured enough to the point to where I don't believe it's really it's more of a what solution meets your needs, not stay away from these other ones because this is the only one that really is, full has the features. I mean, it's really that thing of, hey, at this point, I have no concerns pointing to somebody and say, you can use any one of the three. It's your preference, and let's get something that meets your requirements, not necessarily saying, oh, well, don't pick Unleashed because it doesn't do X, Y, or Z, or, so I love that about it. And like I said, we talked about it 2 weeks ago with Bart. So there it is. I like the R650 and the Virtual Smart Zone Essentials. You like the R650 and the R750 and Virtual Smart Zone High Scale.
Yep. And to be honest, too, and I think part of this, you and I have both jockeyed controllers for a number of years in past lives. So I think the VSC in either flavor most closely aligns with that. And at the time, Ruckus 1 wasn't out. So I think there's something to do with that. Like if we were coming in completely green, it's very possible we go, hey, look, I want Ruckus 1.
Yes.
You're saying it's frictional. I mean, Unleashed isn't much worse, right? At the end of the day,
right.
It's literally like, do you want it in the cloud or do you want it in your own cloud? It's effectively what Unleashed is. You're running your controller on, and again, we have to have a conversation about that whole, just on the controller architecture and things like that. It's very, R1, you can't get any, cloud was easy, right? You literally open up your AP out of the box. You go to the Ruckus cloud. You put in your serial number, and you're off to the races. Like literally in 5 minutes, if you've got an internet connection wherever you are, that AP is online and running and you're working. Can't get much easier than that. So anyways, again, we can have a whole full-blown episode about pros and cons for each or the ins and outs of any one of them. And maybe we should. Maybe there's people out there listening, and if you are, come find us on Twitter or drop us a note somehow or other. We'll figure that out. We'll put maybe we'll put our email in the show notes, and let us know. Let us know what you want to hear. Anyways,
we can do a cage match.
Oh, and where's my bell? I don't have a bell. Oh, wait, I do have a bell. Hang on. There we go. I got the bell. I knew I had the bell. I just had to go to the right page. But anyways, we said this is going to be like a 15-minute episode. We lie, but we don't really lie. We love you guys. We wanted to talk, and it was fun. So anyways, I got nothing else. I'm not going to waffle again on my AP or controller of choice. So, Mr. Palmer, any closing thoughts for today?
I think the fact that, what we said was going to be a 15 or 20 minute episode that is now turned into, by my calculations, a almost 50-minute podcast talking, just trying to argue between, hey, what's your favorite AP and controller? I think it speaks volumes to the options that Ruckus has. So
if you want to keep it as a 30-minute podcast, just listen to it like 1.5 speed. You'll be fine.
You need like two times speed.
Well, but then I'm going to sound like a chipmunk. Maybe that's an improvement. Anyways,
all right.
I've got nothing else. I'm going to hit the outro music so we can talk over it if we want to. But if nothing else, I'll see you in a couple weeks. We'll see
Yep.
both. See you in a couple weeks. And yeah, have a good one, everybody.